A millionaire CEO sat alone at the bus stop. No one stopped, until a small, barefoot girl clutching a teddy bear did. She whispered, "You need a daughter, and I need a daddy." She had no idea that moment would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Snow fell like silence, thick, steady, and slow. As Lucas Bennett sat alone on the metal bench at the corner of Hawthorne and 17th, his leather gloves did little to fight the chill that crept into his bones, but he didn't move. His luxury electric car had broken down 10 minutes earlier. The roadside assistance number had promised help within the hour. He didn't care. He wasn't going anywhere. Not today. Not on this day. Behind him, the city churned on traffic lights blinking red into the white haze, commuters hurrying past with their collars up and earbuds in. But Lucas sat still, eyes fixed on nothing. His navy wool coat gathered flakes across the shoulders. His breath puffed out in small, soundless sighs. Inside, it was worse. Inside, the silence screamed. He wasn't thinking about meetings or clients or profit projections. He was thinking about the empty booster seat in his back seat, the one that had stayed there for 2 years, the one that should have been filled with a little girl humming to the radio, her sneakers scuffing the leather, her voice asking if they could stop for pancakes after swim class. Instead, all that remained was absence and the unbearable echo of what used to be. Then, a presence. He felt it before he saw her, a shift in the air. A tiny form sat down beside him, quietly, without hesitation. He turned his head slightly and blinked in confusion. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her bare feet were blotched with red, pressed tightly into the slushy concrete. A ragged yellow dress fluttered under a torn gray hoodie, and in her arms she clutched a stuffed teddy bear so worn it barely resembled a bear at all. The right ear was missing. One button eye was stitched on sideways. In her other hand, she held half of a cookie, the crumbs stuck to her chapped fingers. Lucas opened his mouth to say something, but she spoke first. "You look like you lost someone," she said softly. Her voice was small but clear, like a bell through snow. He froze. She studied him, then tilted her head. "I did too." A gust of wind blew past, lifting her tangled curls from her cheeks. She didn't flinch. Her gaze didn't break. Lucas managed to swallow. Where's your—" Before he could finish, she leaned in a little, close enough for him to see the smudge of dirt on her nose, the stubborn steadiness in her eyes. And then she whispered, "Chuck, you need a daughter, and I need a daddy." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them with such fragile certainty, as if she wasn't asking but simply stating a fact the world had missed. Something ran cold through his spine, not from the snow, but from the inside. His fingers, still clutching the paper lunch bag he hadn't touched since morning, trembled. He gripped it tighter until the paper gave a soft crinkle. His breath caught. He couldn't speak. He hadn't spoken like this to a child in 2 years. Not since he kissed his daughter's forehead one last time in that hospital room. Not since the nurses unhooked the machines. Not since the crash. The images never left. The grief had calcified, hardening around his heart like concrete. Until now. "What's your name?" he finally managed, voice hoarse. The girl didn't answer immediately. She turned her gaze forward to the road. "Hannah." He looked around. No adult in sight. No coat, no shoes. Just this barefoot girl sitting beside him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Where are your parents?" he asked carefully. "They're not my real ones," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They didn't want me." Lucas's stomach twisted. Who takes care of you?" "I did," she said simply, "for a while." She looked down at the teddy bear and brushed a bit of snow off its face. "Then I got cold." He noticed then that her fingers were trembling, not from nerves, from exposure. She was freezing, and still. She hadn't asked for anything. Not money, not food, not help. Just a daddy. He hesitated, pulling off his gloves. "Here, take these." She accepted them without a word and began pulling them on, slowly, like she wasn't used to kindness coming without strings. Lucas's instincts warred inside him. He should call the police. Report a lost child. That's what responsible people did. That's what law and order required. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the cold metal of his phone. As he did, Hannah shifted on the bench and reached toward him, just to hand him the other half of her cookie. "You can have it," she said. "I saved it. It's got chocolate." Her sleeve fell back as she extended her hand. That's when he saw it. A dark bruise, sickly purple and yellow, wrapped around the thin bone of her wrist. He blinked. His blood ran hot and cold at once. This wasn't just a lost little girl. This was a child in danger. Something inside Lucas cracked, not a fissure this time, but a full, echoing break. He lowered the phone without pressing a single number, and for the first time in years, he whispered out loud to no one in particular, "Oh, God. What happened to you?" Lucas stood there frozen, his breath a plume of vapor in the icy Portland air, his phone clenched uselessly in his hand. Hannah sat quietly beside him, nibbling the edge of her half-cookie as if she hadn't just fractured the thickest walls of his grief with a single whisper. That bruise on her wrist, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't old either. He recognized pain when it tried to hide, and this little girl wasn't hiding her pain. She had learned to carry it in plain sight. The voice in his head repeated all the right steps. Call the police. Stay put. Let the professionals handle it. But his thumb hovered over the emergency dial and refused to move. Hannah didn't speak, just swung her feet above the slush, humming softly to her bear. It made no sense, this serenity. Most kids would be sobbing, panicked. But she seemed like someone who had cried all the tears she had and run out of permission to ask for more. He forced himself to speak. "Hannah, I think I need to get someone to help you." She flinched. It was so subtle he wouldn't have noticed it if he hadn't been watching her closely. Her small shoulders tightened. Her legs stopped swinging. "Please don't call them," she whispered. Lucas blinked. "Call who?" "The ones with clipboards. The ones who say temporary placement, but it's never just temporary." She turned to him then, eyes too knowing for her age. "They say they help kids, but sometimes they send you where it's worse." He couldn't breathe for a second. "What do you mean worse?" "I had a real mommy, but she got sick. Then I had a fake mommy and daddy. They smiled a lot when people watched. But they didn't like me when the door closed." Lucas swallowed hard. "Did they hurt you?" Hannah didn't nod. She didn't cry. She just said quietly, "He didn't like when I made noise, or when I spilled milk, or when I forgot to say thank you. I started forgetting a lot." Lucas closed his eyes for half a second. He'd once believed that nothing could break a heart already shattered. He had been wrong. "I promise," he said gently. I just want to make sure you're safe." But as he reached again for his phone, Hannah's body stiffened and she bolted off the bench. "Hannah!" She sprinted down the sidewalk, slipping once on the icy pavement, but scrambling to her feet without a sound. Lucas took off after her, his dress shoes skidding over frozen patches, heart thundering. The snow thickened, blurring her form as she darted past a shuttered bakery and disappeared into an alley behind a row of dumpsters. He found her collapsed beside a loading dock, curled around the teddy bear like it was her last defense. She was trembling, cheeks pale under streaks of soot and cold. "Hannah," he breathed, dropping to his knees. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" No response. He touched her shoulder. Her skin was blazing, too hot, too fast. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the cold. Her little fingers clung to the bear, her lips slightly parted in a silent groan. Lucas didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms. She was featherlight, unnaturally so. As he carried her toward the street, he felt her head drop against his chest. Her hoodie fell open, revealing more bruises, faint yellowing ones trailing up the side of her ribs. He swallowed bile. A cab pulled over without needing to be flagged, the driver clearly alarmed by the sight of a man in a cashmere coat carrying a limp child through the snow. "Nearest hospital," Lucas barked. "Fast!" The cab sped off. Lucas cradled Hannah in the back seat, whispering softly even though she was unconscious. "Hang on, kid. You've come too far. Just hang on." They reached St. Vincent's ER in under 10 minutes. The staff moved quickly once they saw the state she was in. A nurse took Hannah from his arms. The moment their connection broke, a surge of panic rose in his throat. "Sir, are you her guardian?" the triage nurse asked. Lucas hesitated. "No, yes. I found her at a bus stop. She needs help." "Name?" "Hannah. That's all I know." "Any known allergies?" She didn't say. Please, just help her." The nurse nodded and disappeared through the double doors. Lucas stood there alone in the fluorescent-lit waiting area, his pulse racing, his hands trembling. The warmth of Hannah's body still lingered against his chest, and it terrified him how fast that space had gone cold. He sat down, staring blankly at the visitor guidelines sign. A memory, sudden and sharp, pierced through him. 6 years ago, another hospital, another child. His daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb as machines beeped around them. Back then, he'd been full of promises. He would protect her. He would be enough. And then fate stole her before he could even try. He buried his face in his hands. Time passed in muffled announcements and beeping machines. A gentle voice broke through. "Mr. Bennett?" He looked up to see a kind-eyed woman in blue scrubs. "She's stable, still feverish, but responsive. She's resting now." Lucas exhaled, barely realizing he'd been holding his breath. "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded. "1 minute, but just you. And are you a relative?" Lucas hesitated again, then said the only thing that felt right. "No, but I'm not leaving her." She studied him, then smiled gently. "All right." Inside the room, Hannah was curled beneath a white blanket. Her face looked even smaller against the stark hospital light. Her teddy bear had been tucked beside her. Lucas walked in slowly and pulled a chair close to the bed. He reached out and brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was clammy but cooler than before. She stirred. Her hand twitched, reaching blindly, and found his. Fingers curled around his without hesitation. Lucas sat there, holding on to that tiny hand, feeling the fear and weight in every ounce of her trust. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what this meant. But he knew this. He wasn't going anywhere. The next morning brought with it a weak patch of sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds. Lucas had barely slept, dozing off and on in the plastic chair beside Hannah's bed. His neck ached, and the coffee he'd bought from the vending machine had gone cold hours ago. But he hadn't left. Not once. He couldn't. When Hannah stirred under the blanket, her eyes fluttered open slowly. She blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, then turned her head and saw him. For a moment, she looked confused, like waking from a dream you don't want to end. Then her fingers reached for her bear. Lucas sat up. "Hey, you're awake." She nodded faintly. Her lips were dry, her voice barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "St. Vincent's." "You fainted. You had a fever." She turned her face away, almost ashamed. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," Lucas said gently. "You needed help." Hannah didn't respond, just pulled the blanket up a little higher and hugged the bear close to her chest. Her eyes drifted to the clear tube taped to her arm, each slow drop a reminder of how fragile she felt. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. A woman in her early 40s entered a doctor, by the coat and badge clipped to her pocket. Her presence was calm, like someone used to holding fragile things without breaking them. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Karen Moore," she said kindly. "Mind if I check on our little warrior here?" Lucas stepped aside. Hannah didn't flinch, but she didn't speak either. She simply let the doctor listen to her chest, check her vitals, and examine the bruises without comment. It was the silence that hurt more than any scream might have. "She's stable now," Dr. Moore said, glancing at Lucas. "The fever's down. Mild dehydration, some healing bruises, and signs of older trauma that, well, you likely noticed." Lucas nodded tightly. Dr. Moore crouched down to meet Hannah's eyes. "Hannah, I know you've been through a lot. No one's going to make you go anywhere you don't want to. Not today. You're safe here, okay?" Hannah gave the tiniest nod. After the doctor left, Lucas sat down again. The air in the room was too quiet. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to tell me where you came from?" Hannah shrugged without looking at him. "Places. Do you remember who you lived with?" "They weren't real," she said softly. "Not like my first mom." "Your birth mom?" "Yeah." A pause. "She got sick. I think it was her lungs or her blood. She used to sing at night, even when she was too tired to read. She told me to keep singing after she was gone." Lucas felt something catch in his throat. "They said a nice family was going to take care of me after that," she continued, her voice steady but far away. "They smiled big for the lady from the agency. They gave me pancakes that first morning. Then after a week, they stopped smiling." Lucas stayed silent, letting her speak on her own terms. "He didn't like messes, or when I asked too many questions. One time I spilled grape juice on the rug, and he dragged me by the arm and told me I wasn't worth the trouble. Said maybe I should sleep where trouble belongs, in the garage." Lucas clenched his fists in his lap, forcing himself to stay composed. "He left me there overnight, twice." She looked at him now, her eyes clear. "I didn't cry. Crying made it worse." He could barely speak, but managed, "How long were you there before you ran?" "A while. I waited until I knew the dog wouldn't bark. I packed Teddy and a cookie. I figured I could make it somewhere. Then I found the bench. And you." Lucas swallowed. "You did the right thing." "No," she said simply. "I was supposed to stay quiet, invisible. But when I saw you, I thought, maybe God left you on the bench for me." He stared at her, stunned. "I know I'm not your daughter," she said, her voice smaller now. "But you looked like someone who needed one." The silence between them pulsed. Lucas could feel it thudding in his chest. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "2 years ago, I had a daughter. Her name was Sophie. She was 8. Hannah looked at him, listening. "There was a car accident. I wasn't with them. My wife and Sophie were coming back from a piano recital. Black ice. They didn't make it." She blinked. "You had a Sophie?" "I did." They sat in silence, two people in different kinds of pain, somehow meeting in the middle. Then Hannah scooted over slightly, making room beside her on the bed. Lucas hesitated, then moved closer. She didn't flinch. She just leaned her small head against his arm. "I didn't think you'd stay," she murmured. Lucas looked down at her. "Why?" "Because people leave. That's what they do when I'm not good enough." He wrapped an arm around her, slowly, gently. "Well, I guess I'm not very good at leaving." She didn't respond, but her breathing slowed, and her head rested heavier on his arm. Minutes later, a nurse peeked in to check vitals and paused, seeing the scene. A man in a business suit holding a small, sleeping girl who wasn't his, but fit against him like she always had been. She smiled quietly and backed out of the room. Lucas sat there a long time, the weight of Hannah's head against his chest, the rhythm of her breath syncing with his own. He didn't know what came next. But in that moment, he wasn't thinking about boardrooms or spreadsheets or deadlines. He was thinking about one small girl who didn't cry when she told her story. Because she'd already learned that sometimes pain whispers, and it was time someone finally listened. The car ride back to Lucas's house was silent, but it wasn't the same silence that used to fill his car. This one had weight, a kind of softness that came when two people didn't need to talk to know something important had shifted. Hannah sat in the back seat, her bear hugged to her chest, eyes wide as they passed rows of snow-covered trees and tall apartment buildings. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask anything. She just watched the world outside like someone unsure if they were still allowed to belong in it. Lucas's house sat at the edge of the city, nestled behind wrought iron gates and tall hedges. A modern glass and stone home with sleek lines, smart lighting, and floors that gleamed like water. It was the kind of house that made people whisper at open houses and nod in impressed silence. But inside, it felt cold. Not from temperature, but from vacancy. Like it had been designed for show, not for living. Not since Sophie. He opened the front door, and Hannah stepped inside cautiously, the way someone might enter a museum. Her feet made no sound on the hardwood floors. She clutched her bear tighter as she looked around, gaze drifting across the tall ceilings, the untouched couch cushions, the framed photographs of people no longer alive. Lucas took off his coat, unsure what to say. "You can stay here, just until we figure out the next steps." She nodded but didn't move from the doorway. "I'll make a fire," he offered, walking toward the living room. He hadn't used the fireplace in nearly 2 years, but today he struck a match and watched the flames crawl to life behind the glass. A small warmth began to spread, dancing across the walls. He turned to find Hannah standing in the doorway still, arms tucked in, eyes unsure. "You want to come sit?" She hesitated, then tiptoed closer, stopping at the edge of the rug. Her fingers brushed the edge of the couch. "It smells like someone used to love here," she said softly. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. The words hit him in a place he thought had long since gone numb. He didn't answer. He just nodded once, then walked into the kitchen. He poured her a glass of warm milk and placed a muffin from the freezer in the oven to heat. When he returned, she was sitting cross-legged on the rug, her bear propped beside her. A handful of colored pencils she'd pulled from her backpack now scattered across the coffee table. "What are you drawing?" he asked, setting the milk down gently beside her. She didn't look up. "You." That made him pause. "You looked sad at the bus stop," she said. "But now, less sad." He crouched beside her and glanced at the paper. It was simple, childlike scribbles of 3 figures standing under snowflakes. One small, one medium with long hair, one tall with glasses that resembled his. The tall one was smiling. "You smile in this one," she said matter-of-factly. Lucas stared at the paper. He hadn't smiled like that since. God, he couldn't even remember. "Can I put it on the fridge?" she asked. He nodded slowly. She climbed to her feet, walked into the kitchen barefoot, and used a magnet shaped like a lemon to pin the drawing onto the stainless steel door. Then she stepped back and stared at it like she was anchoring herself to something new. "I like it here," she said simply. "It feels safe." Lucas opened his mouth to reply, but a knock at the door interrupted him. It was sharp and deliberate. He walked to the entryway and pulled open the door. Mrs. Delaney, his neighbor from across the cul-de-sac, stood there bundled in a red coat, her thin brows furrowed. "Lucas," she said with a tight smile, "I saw a little girl in your window. Thought I should check in." He stiffened slightly. "Yes, she's a guest." Her eyes narrowed. "Didn't know you had family visiting?" "I don't. And she's not your—" "No," he said. "Not yet." Delaney's gaze flicked past his shoulder, clearly trying to get a better look inside. "You know how things are these days. Strangers see a child with someone who isn't their parent." Lucas didn't let her finish. "Thank you for your concern. But we're fine." She nodded slowly, not convinced. "I called child services, just in case." He tensed. "You what?" She looked out of place, Lucas. "You understand. I just, better safe than sorry." Without waiting for permission, she turned and walked back to her porch. Lucas closed the door more forcefully than necessary. When he turned back around, Hannah stood at the end of the hallway, her small face pale. She'd heard enough. "It's okay," she said softly. "They always find me." Lucas walked over, crouched to her level. "You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong." Her voice wavered. "They'll take me away, won't they?" "Not if I can help it." She looked at him, searching his face for something real. "Even if I'm not yours?" He didn't answer right away. Then he gently said, "You're here. That's what matters now." That night, Lucas made her grilled cheese and tomato soup, Sophie's favorite. He didn't mention that. He just watched Hannah dip her sandwich quietly, her legs swinging under the stool at the breakfast bar. She insisted on helping with dishes afterward. He handed her a towel and let her dry the cups. As she reached for a tray of spoons, her sleeve slipped down again. This time he noticed a second bruise on her forearm, faded but still visible. His chest tightened. He didn't speak. He just took the towel from her hands, placed it on the counter, and knelt beside her. "I need you to know something," he said. "You never deserved that. Any of it." Hannah's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. "I just wanted someone to keep me," she whispered. "Like I was worth keeping." Lucas didn't hesitate. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, her small frame stiff at first. Then slowly, she melted into him. Later that night, as snow began to fall again outside the wide windows, Hannah curled up on the couch with a blanket and her bear. Lucas sat in the armchair across from her, flipping through emails he couldn't focus on. His mind kept drifting to her drawing on the fridge, to her words, to the bruise. He heard her voice again, a soft murmur. "If they take me, it's okay." He looked up. "What?" Hannah's eyes were already half closed. "I just wanted to feel like someone's kid, even for one day." Lucas stood, crossed the room, and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. He sat on the floor beside the couch, hand resting lightly on the edge. "You are someone's," he whispered, "and it's not just for one day." But she had already fallen asleep, her breath even, the tension in her brow finally loosened. Lucas stayed there long into the night, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, listening to the hum of the fridge behind him, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, the house didn't feel so cold anymore. The following morning began in stillness. Lucas woke to the soft aroma of something faintly sweet maple syrup and ash from the dying fire. He padded downstairs to find Hannah already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug with her teddy bear upright beside her like a silent companion. The drawing from the night before still clung to the fridge, her crayons arranged in neat little piles on the coffee table. She was humming softly, a tune unfamiliar and fragile, like a lullaby with no words. Lucas watched for a moment from the staircase, the sight of her so strangely natural inside his home that it made his chest tighten. The girl who just days ago had curled into herself in a hospital bed now looked like she belonged here. But belonging was a delicate thing, especially for someone who'd had it stolen before. "Hey," he said quietly as he stepped into the room. Hannah looked up with a sleepy smile. "I made a new one." She held up a new drawing. 3 people again. One tall with square glasses and messy black scribbles for hair. One small girl with pigtails. And in the middle, a woman this time, with long golden hair and a bright yellow dress. "Who's this?" Lucas asked, pointing. "That's Sophie," she said gently. "I don't know what she looked like, but I thought maybe she could be in it too." He froze. It was the first time she had said his daughter's name, and she hadn't said it with pity or hesitation, just kindness. Like someone leaving a flower at a grave they'd never visited, but still knew it mattered. Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. "You want some cocoa?" Hannah nodded. "If it's not too much trouble." He smiled faintly. "It's never too much." In the kitchen, he pulled out a canister of cocoa powder and the old copper pot he hadn't used in years. As the milk warmed on the stove, he stirred slowly, the way he used to when Sophie would stand on a step stool beside him, sneaking marshmallows behind his back. The memory hurt, but it also glowed. He returned to the living room with 2 mugs, one with a little fox on it, the same one Sophie used to claim as hers. Hannah's hands wrapped around the warm ceramic like it was something sacred. She took a sip and closed her eyes, humming. "This tastes like Christmas," she whispered. They drank in silence, the fire crackling softly beside them. Then Lucas stood up slowly and motioned toward the hallway. "There's a room upstairs I want to show you." Hannah followed him, barefoot and quiet. The hallway was lined with photos, wedding pictures, candid shots of Sophie in a Halloween costume, a watercolor painting Sophie had made in kindergarten. Lucas hadn't looked at them in a long time. They had become background noise. He paused in front of a white door at the end. His hand rested on the knob, frozen. He hadn't opened it since the funeral, But now it didn't feel like stepping into a grave. It felt like unlocking something that had been waiting. He opened the door slowly. The air inside was still and faintly sweet, like pressed flowers and old dreams. The room had been preserved books neatly on the shelf, the lavender comforter still tucked over the bed, stuffed animals lined along the wall in a crescent moon pattern. A child's world, paused in time. Hannah stepped inside carefully, her fingers brushing over the edge of the dresser. "It's pretty." Lucas didn't speak. She walked to the beanbag chair near the window and settled into it like it was meant for her. She picked up a picture book from the shelf and opened it. "She had good stories," she said quietly. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, his throat tight. The sun filtered in, casting a soft glow across Hannah's face, and in that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. Not as a replacement, not as a cure, but as a continuation. Like love reshaped itself when you least expected it. "I could read in here sometimes," she offered, her voice tentative. He nodded. "Yeah, you can." That night, Lucas found himself in the kitchen again, heating soup and slicing fruit for dinner. He heard Hannah's voice from down the hall, soft, melodic, speaking to someone who wasn't there. When he peeked into the room, he saw her showing Teddy the pictures on the wall. "This was her daddy," she whispered to the bear. "Now he's mine too. Just a little." After dinner, she curled up in a blanket on the couch while Lucas cleaned the dishes. He glanced at the fridge and found a new drawing added 3 people holding hands, standing in front of a house with tall windows and a fire glowing inside. Above it, she'd written in blocky letters, "Safe." He stood there for a long time, staring at it. The next morning, an envelope arrived at the front door. It was stamped from the Department of Family Services. Lucas opened it with steady hands and read the words without emotion, until one sentence slammed into him. "The child's former adoptive guardians have filed a petition for her return." He sat down hard at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in his grip. Outside, the snow had started again, falling in soft spirals. He looked up to see Hannah in the hallway, her crayon-stained fingers holding the little fox mug. "Everything okay?" she asked. Lucas stood slowly, walked over, and knelt in front of her. "No," he said honestly, "but we're going to make it okay." Her face didn't crumble. She didn't panic. She just nodded and slipped her hand into his, and that was enough to keep him standing. The conference room in the juvenile court building smelled faintly of old paper and too much coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the chairs were stiff enough to ensure no one stayed comfortable for long. Lucas sat at the far end of the polished table, his suit jacket draped over the back of the chair. He didn't need armor today. He needed resolve. Next to him sat Marcia Klein, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and notorious for her courtroom presence. She was calm now, reviewing a folder filled with dates, medical records, photos, and sworn statements. On the cover was a single name, Hannah Grace Wilson. Across the table sat the former adoptive couple, Greg and Leslie Monroe. They looked polished, rehearsed. Greg wore a church blazer and a smug half-smile. Leslie's pearl earrings glinted under the overhead lights. Their lawyer, a bored-looking man in a beige suit, flipped casually through his tablet. Lucas hated everything about them. The judge, an older man with a weathered face and a reputation for listening more than speaking, entered. Everyone stood, then sat again. The bailiff called for opening statements. The Monroe's lawyer went first. "This case is simple," he began, almost lazily. The child in question was placed with my clients through legal channels. While the transition was understandably difficult, considering the child's previous losses, my clients provided shelter, food, and access to education. The child ran away. That doesn't constitute abuse. It constitutes trauma, and they want her back. Marcia didn't even flinch. We'll see. The judge nodded. Let's hear from the child. Lucas's chest tightened. The door opened, and Hannah walked in, clutching her teddy bear with one arm and a sheet of paper in the other. She wore a navy blue dress and a small yellow clip in her hair. One she had picked herself that morning, saying it reminded her of sunshine. Her steps were small, but steady. She walked past Greg without looking at him. Marcia leaned in and whispered, "She's got this." Hannah sat in the witness chair. The judge leaned forward. "Hannah, do you know why you're here today?" She nodded. "And are you okay talking to me for a few minutes?" Another nod. Then quietly, "Yes, sir. You can tell me anything you want. No one here will interrupt you. We just want to understand." Hannah looked down at her bear, then at the drawing in her lap. Slowly she unfolded it and held it up. It showed two houses, one dark with bars on the windows, one bright with a sun overhead. A stick-figure girl stood in the dark one with tears. In the other, she stood smiling, beside a tall man with square glasses. "That's what it felt like," she said, "when I lived there, and now." The room went silent. The judge's voice was soft. "Can you tell me more?" Hannah nodded. "When I spilled juice on the carpet, Mr. Monroe got mad. He said I wasn't worth cleaning up after. When I forgot to fold the towels right, he yelled. Loud. Sometimes he'd throw things. Once he threw my bear. Said I didn't deserve toys if I couldn't be quiet." Greg shifted in his seat, suddenly very interested in his hands. Hannah looked directly at the judge. But that's not the worst part. She pointed to a small mark drawn in the corner of the page. "He hit me 17 times. That's how many I counted. Then I stopped counting." Gasps broke out quietly across the courtroom. Even the bailiff looked shaken. The judge raised a hand. "Thank you, Hannah." But she wasn't finished. "When I ran away, I thought maybe I'd go back to the shelter, but it was closed that day. So I walked until I found a bench, and that's where I met him." She turned to look at Lucas, her voice shaking now. "He didn't ask for a daughter, but I asked for a dad." Lucas could barely breathe. "He gave me cocoa and warm socks, and he listened. Not just with his ears, but with his heart. I was scared every day before. I'm not scared anymore." The judge leaned back, visibly moved. Marcia stood next. "Your Honor, we have hospital records, photos of visible injuries, testimony from Dr. Karen Moore, and evidence of psychological harm. This is not a child that ran away from kindness. This is a child who ran for her life." Greg started to object, but his own lawyer placed a hand on his arm. Then Lucas was called to speak. He stood, voice steady, eyes fixed on the judge. "I'm not here because I want to play hero. I'm here because this girl deserves a home, not just a roof, but safety, love, peace. She may not be mine by blood, but she's mine by bond, and I won't let anyone take her from that." A quiet beat. The judge glanced through the files. "The court will recess for 72 hours. A final ruling will be made based on submitted evidence and expert evaluation." Gavel down. Lucas rushed to Hannah before she even stood. She wrapped her arms around his waist, the bear pressed between them. "I was scared," she said into his coat. "I know," he whispered back. "But you were brave. braver than I've ever been." As they walked out of the courtroom, passing reporters and murmurs, Greg and Leslie remained seated, staring blankly ahead. For the first time, they looked like the ones who had lost everything. Outside, the cold air slapped Lucas awake. He lifted Hannah into his arms, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. 17 times, she said again, quietly. Lucas hugged her tighter. Never again. And somewhere behind them, the courthouse doors swung shut, not as an ending, but the beginning of a battle they were ready to finish. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. After court, Lucas and Hannah had returned home, and the stillness that once haunted the walls now wrapped around them like a blanket. The fridge hummed softly in the background. The fire in the living room crackled low. The snow outside had crusted into a hard sheen, reflecting moonlight through the tall windows. Upstairs, Lucas stood in front of the door to the guest room, soon to be Hannah's room. He had spent the afternoon clearing it out, boxing up untouched furniture, rolling up the gray rug that had always felt too cold, too neutral. Hannah stood beside him now, barefoot in her pajamas, with a paint swatch booklet in her hand. "I want this one," she said, holding up a bright, buttery yellow. "It feels like sunshine." Lucas looked down at the square of color, then back at her. "Sunshine, huh?" She nodded. "It's the opposite of the garage." He blinked, caught off guard by how easily she said it. Not like a confession, but a truth she had already made peace with. "Yellow it is." The next day, they painted the room together. Lucas wore one of his old college t-shirts, sleeves rolled up, paint smudged on his jaw. Hannah wore a pair of overalls he'd bought for her that morning, and a headband with bunny ears that came free from the hardware store cashier. She took the job seriously, her small hands moving in slow, deliberate strokes. They didn't talk much, just music playing from a dusty old speaker and the rhythm of brushes on the wall. By late afternoon, the room glowed with golden light, the pale yellow brightening even the shadows. Hannah stepped back and nodded in approval. "This feels like a happy room." Lucas swallowed hard. "It really does." They set up a new bed simple, with white sheets and a soft sunflower blanket. Lucas had ordered a small desk, a beanbag chair, and a corkboard for her drawings. On the windowsill, Hannah lined up a row of paper snowflakes she'd made during her first week in the house. Later, they sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing a box of mac and cheese and giggling at how the paint had dried in Lucas's eyebrows. "I look like a lemon exploded on my face," he said. Hannah snorted. "A very serious lemon." When the laughter faded, she grew quiet. "Will they still come for me?" Lucas shook his head. "We're not done fighting, but no matter what happens next, I won't let you go." She looked up at him, searching his face. "Even if the judge says I have to?" "Even then." The next morning, they visited the cemetery. It was the first time Lucas had gone in over a year. The sky was overcast, and the air held that crisp stillness unique to January mornings. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. Hannah carried a folded piece of paper. They stopped in front of Sophie's headstone, smooth, simple, and impossibly final. Lucas kneeled, placing the flowers gently at the base. Hannah stood beside him, silent. Then she knelt too. "I didn't get to meet you," she whispered. "But thank you for sharing your dad with me." She tucked her drawing beside the flowers. It was the same picture she'd shown in court. Only now there were 4 figures. Sophie stood in the middle, smiling. One arm around Hannah, one hand holding Lucas's. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just pulled her into a hug, and they stayed that way for a long time, snowflakes settling in their hair. That afternoon, back at the house, Lucas opened a drawer in his late wife's old dresser. It had been untouched since the accident. He found a bracelet, delicate silver with a tiny heart charm, and turned it over in his hand. It had been Sophie's. That night, he handed it to Hannah. This belonged to someone very special. She held it like it might disappear. It's pretty. She would have wanted someone brave to have it. Hannah looked up, tears welling. Are you sure? Lucas nodded. It's yours now. She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking the bracelet from his hand. Later, as she lay in bed for the first time in her new room, the bracelet glinting on her wrist, Lucas sat beside her, smoothing the blanket over her legs. Do you think I'm going to stay forever? She whispered. He met her eyes, his voice steady. I'm building a life for you, for us, not just for now, for always. She smiled, barely awake. Even if I forget to fold the towels right? Especially then. As she drifted off, Lucas stepped into the hallway and walked down to the kitchen, where Dr. Karen Moore waited with 2 mugs of coffee and a stack of paperwork. I ran into the social worker, she said. She told me the judge is reviewing everything now. We should hear by tomorrow. Lucas nodded slowly. Karen sipped her drink, watching him. You're not the same man I met that night at the ER. He gave a tired smile. No, that man thought he was too broken to care again. And now? He looked toward the stairs, where yellow light spilled from Hannah's room. Now I'm terrified to lose someone again, but more terrified not to try. Karen nodded. That's how you know it's real. Just then, Lucas's phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the courthouse. Final decision tomorrow, 10 a.m. He put the phone down slowly. His fingers trembled slightly, but not from fear, from hope. Upstairs, he heard Hannah mumble something in her sleep and roll over. The floor creaked above him. He closed his eyes. Whatever came next, they were in it together. The morning light crept gently into the kitchen, painting golden streaks across the countertop and floor. The smell of cinnamon toast lingered in the air as Lucas stood at the sink, watching snow drift slowly through the tall kitchen window. Outside, the world looked hushed, like it was holding its breath. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day everything could change. Hannah sat at the table in her sunshine yellow hoodie, legs swinging under the chair. She was quiet, tracing her finger along the rim of her cocoa mug, the fox one she'd claimed as her own. Her bracelet clinked softly as she moved, the one Lucas had given her, Sophie's. You nervous? He asked gently. She didn't look up. A little. Lucas took a slow breath. Me too. At 9:30 a.m., they bundled into the car. Hannah carried her drawing folder in her lap, the same one she'd taken to court, only now filled with newer sketches. One showed the house, complete with a snow-covered porch and the red scarf she'd left hanging on the front door hook. Another had 3 stick figures under a snowflake sky, arms linked. She hadn't written names on this one. She didn't need to. The courthouse hallway felt colder than the snow outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The same judge waited at the front of the courtroom, spectacles perched low on his nose, papers in neat stacks before him. He looked up as they entered, nodding once in recognition. They sat down. Hannah gripped Lucas's hand tightly. He gave her a small squeeze. She didn't let go. The judge cleared his throat. This court has reviewed all submitted evidence, testimony, and psychological evaluations. What's at stake here is more than legality. It's stability, protection, and the right of a child to live free from fear. Greg and Leslie Monroe were not present. Their attorney sat alone, arms crossed. The message was clear: they had given up the fight. The judge turned to Lucas. "Mr. Bennett, this is not a typical guardianship case. There's no biological tie, no prior relationship. Yet, in every measurable way, you have proven yourself as not only a capable caregiver, but a necessary one." He looked at Hannah then. "Miss Hannah Grace Wilson, do you still wish for Mr. Bennett to become your legal guardian?" Hannah stood slowly, her voice clear and strong. "I don't want a guardian. I want a dad." Silence rippled through the room like wind across glass. The judge smiled. "Then it is the ruling of this court that full legal guardianship is awarded to Mr. Lucas Bennett, effective immediately." The gavel struck. The sound echoed, and Hannah burst into tears. But they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were something else entirely: relief, joy, belonging. Lucas pulled her into his arms as she sobbed into his shirt. He whispered, "We did it," over and over again, as if saying it out loud made it more real. Outside, the snow was falling thick and steady, blanketing the city in quiet. But inside the car on the drive home, laughter filled the space. Hannah talked nonstop about decorating her room with fairy lights, about adopting a kitten, about wanting waffles for dinner, even though it was a Tuesday. Lucas smiled more in that 20-minute ride than he had in the past 2 years. That evening, the house was full. Dr. Karen Moore joined them, along with Marcia Klein, who brought brownies shaped like hearts and a bottle of sparkling cider. They gathered around the kitchen table, mismatched plates stacked high with food, Hannah bouncing in her seat as she told the entire courtroom story with dramatic flair and hand gestures. After dinner, she disappeared for a moment, then returned with a drawing. She placed it in the center of the table without a word. It showed a small girl in a yellow room, arms outstretched. A man stood beside her, smiling. Above them was a single word, carefully printed in all caps: home. Marcia blinked back tears. Dr. Moore reached for her hand. Lucas. Lucas just stared at it. That one word had never meant much to him before, not in a way that mattered. But now it was everything. Later, Lucas tucked Hannah into bed, pulling the sunflower blanket up to her chin. She looked up at him, sleepy-eyed. "I think Sophie would have liked me." He smiled. "She would have loved you. Do you miss her still?" "Every day," he said honestly. "But somehow, missing her doesn't feel as lonely anymore." Hannah reached up and touched his cheek. "I'm glad you were on that bench." He kissed her forehead. "I think I was supposed to be." Downstairs, Lucas walked out onto the porch. The night was cold, but peaceful. Snowflakes danced in the amber light. He exhaled slowly, breath curling into the air like a quiet exclamation. In his hand, he held Hannah's drawing. He looked down at it, then up at the sky. "She wasn't my blood," he whispered. Then he smiled. "But she was always my daughter." Behind him, the front door creaked open. Hannah stood in her slippers and robe, holding a folded blanket and that old teddy bear. "You coming back in?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "Yeah." And as they stepped inside together, closing the door on the winter air, it wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. If this story brought a tear to your eye, please share your reflections in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey. And if you'd like to see more stories of hope and healing, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Then check out our other inspiring tales in the playlist. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.